even what is the reason, what's the purpose that the book is written? If it's in the Bible is not just stories. There are many stories. There obviously has to be moral teachings in the story, and the story doesn't have a lot of law, but it does have plenty of values, and that's what the commentaries explain, that Ruth epitomizes the concept of devotion and kindness to the extreme, and that is why we read the book of Ruth. And another point is this explains the source of Ruth becomes the ancestor of the matriarch, the great-grandmother of King David, and it's very important for the king, the person with the power, to understand the concept of kindness and giving to others. So that's a little bit of what we discussed last week. So let's think about the actual story and what the setting where the story takes place. So the story begins with a family leaving Judea and going to Moab. And why did they leave? They left because there is a famine. All good biblical stories start with a famine. All migration start with famine. So there's a famine and people have to leave. So this family left. Now, it doesn't say so explicitly in the verse, but the commentaries explain that the family that left, they did not leave because they didn't have any bread. Good morning, John. The families did not leave because they didn't have any food. To the contrary, this family was a very prominent family in Judea, and the reason why they left is because they wanted to preserve their wealth. They were afraid that during the time of famine, many people are going to come and ask for charity, and they wanted to preserve their wealth, so they picked up and they left. Obviously, that's something negative. If you leave because you're starving is one thing, but if you leave your people because you want to preserve the wealth, that was seen as negative. So that is something that the commentaries mentioned. We discussed that last week, I believe. Another detail about this, to understand the sort of the political landscape of Israel at the time. Okay. To understand the political landscape of Israel at the time, this is the era. The book starts by It came to pass in the days when the judges judged. Now, when you read the book, the judges judged. It sounds like, great, we have law and order. But make no mistake, the verse is saying the opposite. There's no law and order in the land of Israel. Why is there no law and order? Because if you look at the book of Judges, you see that the era was an era where there was no central powerful government. There was no kings, there are judges. And if you read the book of Judges, you see that the concept of the judges, the era of the judges, was sort of very flaky. There were some periods within the era of the judges where there was a strong judge, other areas where there wasn't. And there was no specific judge here. So every town sort of created their judge, and some people listen to the judge and some people don't listen to the judge. The difference between the judge and the king, of course, is the king has an army to enforce the law. The judge is sort of a moral teacher, but the judge can't really enforce the law. So when the Torah tells you that it came to pass in the days that the judges judged, the Torah is telling you there was no law and order in Israel at the time. And this is an important detail. So we'll get back to that in a minute. The previous story, in other words, a little before this story, there's the terrible, terrible story in the book of Judges of Pilegesh Begiva, of a concubine in Israel that was raped, and that created almost a civil war where all the tribes gathered and waged war against the tribe of Benjamin. Terrible time. And again, this could happen because a woman was raped and there was no justice. So against that backdrop, this story plays out. And a lot of the heroes in this story, which is basically Ruth and Boaz, as we will discuss, a lot of these heroes are operating against the backdrop of a time where there's no central leadership, there's no law and order, and there's no morality. And we see that, you don't get that in this book, but if you read the other books that take place in this era, the era of the judges, you get that feeling. And that's why the very important opening phrase is it came to pass when the judges judged, which is why this helps explain why the wealthy got up and they left. Why? They were afraid if there would be justice, if there would be law, if there would be a king, then the king could protect private property. But because it's an era where there is no one king, there are judges in general, and we know what the judges mean. The judges means that law and order is spotty at best. So therefore, they're leaving to protect their wealth, because who knows, the masses could break in and steal their wealth. So this is just to give a background of the motivation for for the people's for this family, for the fact that they want to leave the land of Israel. Now, one more detail the Talmud says, it wasn't a day that the judges judged. Literally, judges judged. Literally, it could be judging the judges. Shvot is the verb. So it wasn't a day, judges judging the judges. What does it mean, judging the judges? So the Talmud says something interesting. The Talmud says one of the reasons why there was no law and order is because the people judged their judges. So again, the judges are people, they're here to teach the morality. They want to tell people what's right and wrong. But the people listening would, instead of receiving the teachings from the judges, instead they would judge the judges. They would say, you have no business telling us how to behave if you're not living up to those standards. So when the people judge their judges, that means that the people don't accept the moral teachings from their teachers, from the judges, because they feel that the judges themselves are not living up to that moral standard. So that background, against that background, is where the story takes place. And the story takes place, this family leaves the field, leaves Bethlehem, leaves the Bethlehem, which is in Judea, and they go to Moab, as we discussed, and they leave. Now, when they leave, there's a man, Elimelech, he has a wife, Naomi, he has two sons. The two sons marry Moabite woman, one is Arpa, one is Ruth, and they die. They're there for 10 years and they die. So why did they die? Okay, so some people say, was there a sin? Was it just chance? So many people would say that they died either because they abandoned their people. That's sort of the punishment, and therefore the father and the sons both die. Others say that the great sin is that they are. So that's sort of a sin, a sin against the social values of the Torah, that they're running away from their people instead of supporting their people. That's one approach. The other approach would be that the sin really is the fact of intermarriage. At that point, they're marrying people who are not Jewish. Later you see that Ruth will convert, but that's another story. So that is the two approaches of why they're going to pass, why they pass away, and what the sin is. Now the story continues. If you scroll down a little bit, if you have the link that we sent out, you scroll down a little bit. Verse 5 reads, both Machlon and Kilion also died, and the woman was left bereft of her two children and her husband. So now we're shifting to Naomi. So Naomi was the woman who was the wife of Avimelech, the mother of their two sons, Machlon and Kilion. What happens is the husband died, the two sons died, now she's alone. All she has is two daughters-in-law. Now, I don't know if you have a daughter-in-law or you will have a daughter-in-law, but the commentaries point out that mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law don't always get along, especially after the passing of the son. So again, this backdrop of the kindness that Ruth, the daughter-in-law, is going to perform for Naomi is highlighted by the sages, because thinking about considering that the relationship between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law is, I guess, complicated is a good word, not to be too negative so early in the morning, but complicated is a good word. And against that backdrop, performing all that kindness is even more commendable. So she's alone. Now, she gets up and starts traveling. The daughters-in-law also are with her. Now, the Torah doesn't tell us, the verse doesn't tell us what the daughters-in-law exactly want. So in other words, she gets up to move and they're coming with her. Now, what does that mean? Do they want to go back with her to Israel, to Judah, to the land of Yehuda, to the land of Judah, or do they want to go home? We're not clear. So there's a fascinating verse, just interesting to see how the nuances within the verse. So if you look at, I'll read it, but if you have it before you, good. If not, I'll read it for you. Verse 7 reads this, let's read verse 6, then we'll get to verse 7. Verse 6 reads as follows. Now she arose with her daughters-in-law and returned from the fields of Moab. For she had heard in the field of Moab that the Lord had remembered his people to give them bread. So she got the news. She got the news that there's bread, the famine is over in Israel. How does she hear? She gets the news in the fields of Moab. How does she hear? There's no Twitter. There's no email. How does she hear? So the commentaries say she's in the field of Moab. The moment the merchants start coming to the fields of Moab from Judea to sell produce, to sell goods, the moment there's some export activity, then she knows that God remembered Judea and give them bread. Remember, Moab is not far from Judea. There's just a little border, which is called the Jordan River, which you can cross. It's not like the Hudson River, which is hard to cross. You literally can cross the river. It's not a big deal. So as soon as there's bread in Judea, there is going to be some export and some commerce. So she's in the field of Moab, and she hears that God remembered the people of Judah. Now, the verse that I just read, verse 6, is interesting. If you look at the grammar, it's not going to work in the English, but the English reads, now she arose with her daughters-in-law and returned from the fields of Moab. But if you read at verse 6 in the Hebrew, the grammar is a little bit different. Now she arose with her daughters-in-law and returned is singular. Okay? So singular. So they all get up. She arose with her daughters-in-law and returned from the fields of Moab. They all get up. But then when it says return from the fields of Moab, it only says in the singular. So what does this mean? So the commentaries point out what's happening here is as follows. They all get up to move. You know, they had bad luck. At least that's one approach. They sort of had bad luck. What's the bad luck? Her husband, Naomi's husband dies. Her sons die. The daughters-in-law now are widowed. They have bad luck. So the daughters-in-law also want to leave that place. So they all get up and they say, we're moving. But where are they moving to? So here there's already a differentiation. She wants to return to Judah, to return from the fields of Moab. But what does return imply? Return implies to return where you were from. So the daughters-in-law are not returning from the fields of Moab. They live in the fields of Moab. She, however, she's returning. So in other words, we're painting a scene with all three of the women, Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, they get up to leave. But where they want to go to, there's already a differentiation. So they're walking. Naomi wants to go home to Judea, while the daughters-in-law are not yet have a sort of undecided in a sense. So that's where the story continues. Now, they come to the fork in the road, where you have the road to Judea, and then otherwise you have to stay in the road to Judea or stay in the fields of Moab. And now she wants to talk, her daughters-in-law, she wants to say goodbye. And the problem is they don't want to leave. And you see what she does to persuade them from trying to come back with her to Judea. And this begs the question, what's wrong? Why does she care if her daughters-in-law come back to Judea? Right? So you have to think about it. The verse just tells you the story, but the verse doesn't really necessarily tell you all the motivation. So you have to look deeper at the motivation. What is the motivation of Naomi that her daughters-in-law should not come with her? And also, what does she use to persuade them, to persuade the daughters-in-law not to follow her to Judea? The Jews are always trying to get other Jews to move to Israel. Here she's trying to say, stay away, stay home, don't come back to me. Don't come back with me. So I'll read a verse or two. Verse 8. So they're traveling toward Judah until they get to the fork in the road. Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go return each woman to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the deceased and with me. So apparently, both daughters-in-law were very kind to Naomi, to their husbands. Even after their husbands died, they remained loyal to Naomi. They took care of her. So she is saying, go back home and God will perform kindness with you and pay you back for the kindness you did with me, you did to me. They say, may the Lord grant you that you find rest, each woman in her husband's house. And she kissed them, and they raised their voices and wept. So everybody's crying. Wonderful. Verse 10. And they said to her, no, but we will return with you to your people. We want to go with you to your people. Now, what does that mean? What is their intention? So do they want to convert? That's the first question. Do they want to convert to Judaism? The answer is so far no. Later on, we contrast this verse with the verse later where Ruth would say, I'm going to your people and to your God. They don't mention anything about God. They just say, we want to be with you. We're going to return with you to your people. We're happy to live amongst the Jews. Naomi says it's a bad idea. Why does she say it's a bad idea? And Naomi said, verse 11, Naomi said, return my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they should be your husbands? She says, why are you coming with me? What are you waiting? You're waiting for me to have children? I'm too old to have children. That's what she says in 12. Return my daughters, go, for I have become too old to marry, that I should say that I have hope. Even if I had a husband tonight, and even if I had born sons, would you wait for them until they grew up? Would you shut yourselves off for them and not marry? No, my daughters, for it is much more bitter for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. She's basically saying, don't come with me because you have no one to marry. Why do you have no one to marry? So she says, I'm too old to have additional children. Okay, so there are other men in Judea. She's the only. Why does Naomi think that her daughters-in-law will not find anyone to marry in all of Judea? Sometimes Jewish men could be good husbands. No, I'm kidding. Most times. So why can't they find other? Why can't they find other men? So the answer is, here's the problem. We alluded to this last time. The problem is that the verse says you're not allowed to marry a Moabite. We discussed this a little bit last week. A Moabite convert, you can't marry a Moabite convert. Later on, the rabbis refined this, and we understand that refers to the men, not to the women, but that was not very well known at the time. So basically what Naomi is telling the daughters-in-law, you don't have to come back with me. And if you come back with me, you're not going to find anyone to marry. You're going to be alone. And it's going to be bitter for you. So Naomi says, did God perform bitterness against me? In other words, I'm suffering now, but there's no reason for you to suffer. You can have a bright future. You don't have to come, and you don't have to come with me to back home and live in poverty and not have a husband. We'll talk about the poverty later. When they left, they were wealthy. When they come back, you see that they were completely penniless. So that's a fairly logical argument. She says, don't come with me. You're not going to have anyone to marry. You have no future with me in Judea. Therefore, go back home. The Medrash also says that both Ruth and Arpa, Ruth and her sister-in-law, were, both those women, the daughters-in-law of Naomi, were from this distinguished families in Moab. They were princesses. They had great lineage and they had great wealth. And that's why they married this famous family coming from Judea. So here is a great contrast where if they go home, they can go back to their wealth. If they go to Judah, then if they go to Judea, to the land of Yehuda, then what happens is, first of all, they're going to be poor. And second of all, there's nothing to hope for because there's nothing to hope for because there is no husband, because a Jewish man would not marry them. At least that's what, according to what we understand. So that's one approach. One approach is Naomi doesn't want them to come because Naomi doesn't want them to come because she's concerned for the well-being of the daughters-in-law. That's one approach. There are other approaches. One approach is, in some sense, it's possible that Naomi is embarrassed, right? Because when she comes back, she's coming back with the Moabite woman. That will sort of highlight that sort of what they did wrong, that the family left and they came back only when the economy turned around and they married Moabite women, which you weren't supposed to do. And now bringing them back to Judea sort of will serve as a reminder of the sin of the family. That's another approach. Another approach would be that Naomi wants to see how sincere they are. And that's why ultimately she keeps resisting, and ultimately when she sees that Ruth is sincere in her desire to come, that's when she takes her. So according to the third interpretation, according to the first two interpretations, Naomi really doesn't want the daughters-in-law to come. According to the third interpretation, she wants them to come if they're sincere. So this is almost like a test. It depends. So it depends how you read the verses. I'm just putting it out there that we know that a lot of the laws of conversion we learn from the book of Ruth. And an important law of conversion is that when a Gentile comes to and wants to convert, the first thing we do is try to dissuade him, because being Jewish, as you know, is overrated. No, I'm kidding. Being Jewish has a lot of baggage. So the first thing, we have to be honest, and we have to say, look, it's not necessarily the easiest lifestyle, and we try to persuade them. And then if they persist, then they're accepted, just like Ruth was, as we will see. So that approach would say that Naomi actually would be happy for the daughters-in-law to come, and this is sort of a test. So there are different ways of reading the verses. We're not sure that the way the Bible works. The Bible tells us stories. The Bible doesn't necessarily tell us exactly what the intention of the characters are, and therefore there are different approaches of how to read, not the story, but the intentions behind the characters here. Okay, so what happens? So where are we in the story? The story is, again, the husbands died. They want to go back. They hear that the economy has turned around. Hashem remembered the land of Judah. They're heading back. Naomi tells her daughters-in-law, stay home. There's no reason for you to come with me. Nobody's going to marry you. And that's exactly where we are. So what happens is the first daughter-in-law says goodbye. And it's a very heartfelt scene. Verse 14, chapter 1, and they raised their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth cleaved to her. So here you have a kiss versus cleaving. The word cleaving is a very powerful word in the Bible, davak. It is a very strong word. It's used in very few places, in very few contexts. The first time it's used is when the verse says that therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. Vidavak beishto, cleave to his wife. So it's a very deep, intimate bond. So here we're saying, yeah, Ruth also, Orpah, the other sister-in-law, also had an emotional connection to her mother-in-law, but that was a kiss. A kiss is much more external. With Ruth, Ruth cleaved to her, which is obviously much, much stronger. So Orpah leaves. Verse 15, okay, the mother-in-law is sort of 50% successful. She got rid of one. One is going to turn back. So now she turns to Ruth and she said, lo, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her God. Return after your sister-in-law. Okay, so here she inserts the word and to her God. Very interesting. So now we didn't mention any theology. We didn't mention any religion. We just said, go back, you'll find a husband. Now she says, look, Orpah is going home. She's going back to her people, to the Moabite people, and to her God, right? Obviously, even if they didn't convert, but when they lived together with their husbands in the family, they weren't serving their idols. And here, Naomi sort of mentions in passing that, maybe sort of in passing, but she puts that into the conversation. Orpah is going to go home. She's going back to her family, and she's going back to her God. And that's why Ruth now starts responding, and Ruth responds, and we'll see in a minute how she responds and how the rabbis interpret her response. So I'm just going to read what Ruth says. So Ruth says, these are very famous verses in the Bible. And this is sort of the calling of not just Ruth, but all converts who want to convert sincerely. This is sort of giving voice to that feeling. So Ruth said, do not entreat me to leave you, to return from following you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So may the Lord do to me and to you, do to me, and so may he continue, if anything but death separate me and you. So she gives this whole long speech. And she basically says, I want to be with you. I'm going to go wherever you go. I will lodge where you lodge. Your God is my God. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. So you see right away, Ruth now is also responding to what Naomi said. Naomi mentioned, she dropped in the conversation that Orpah is going back to her God, to the God of Moab. And here, Ruth also brings in God and says, you know what? Your God is my God as well. And that's why we read these verses, not just as where she wants to live and is she going to choose a place to live. We're looking at this verse as a declaration of her commitment, not just to Naomi, but also to Judaism, because she says, your God is my God. And the rabbis elaborate upon this, and I'm going to try to give you a few samples of what the commentaries say, highlighting, using these verses to highlight the commitment of Ruth to Judaism. So here we go. He says, wherever you go, I will go. El asher telechi elech. Wherever you go, I will go. So it's not just I'm going to go to the same location. The rabbis explain that what she's really saying is not only am I going for the same location, but I'm also going for the same tachlit, for the same purpose. In other words, she's telling Naomi, she's not going with Naomi because she's hoping for some material benefit, either finding a husband or we'll see later, either finding a husband or finding somebody, the wealthy, to support them. What she is saying, I'm going for the same purpose that you're going back. Why are you going back? Because you want to go back to Israel, and there you can fulfill the mitzvot that are specific to the land of Israel. So she says, I too, I'm going for the same motivation that you are going. And then it's very interesting. He says, where you lodge, I will lodge. What does it mean where you lodge? So lodging, talin is an expression that denotes that it's not permanent, it's temporary. So here the rabbis are explaining something interesting. She says, what's the attitude of Ruth? Ruth is not just talking about, again, she's trying to convey to Naomi that she's not just saying, I want to go to Israel with you because I hope that that our fortunes will turn. She says, I'm deeply committed to your lifestyle and to your religion. And so what the commentaries are saying is that she's telling her mother-in-law that I am just like you. What is the attitude of the righteous? The attitude of the righteous is that this physical world is temporary. In other words, it's not the only world. There's spirituality, there's the afterlife. And therefore the physical success is less important to the righteous because they have their eye also on the spiritual life and the afterlife. So she says, I'm just like you. The same way you will lodge, I will lodge. And that could mean more broadly that just like for you, the whole life on this earth is temporary, and therefore, because you have spiritual values, I'm the same way. There's a very famous Hasidic story that there was a group of singers that made a song out of this, and there was a time that Rabbi Darren really loved the song. It was a student of it was a story about the Maggid. The Maggid is the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. And the story goes as follows, that the Maggid was very poor, and he had a very wealthy disciple. And the disciple shows up at the Maggid's home, and he sees the poverty, and he's in shock. And he says, I want to upgrade the house. So the Maggid says, okay. He says, oh, are you coming? Where are you staying in town? He says, well, I'm staying in the Motel 6. I'm staying in the Kretschmer, like they used to say. I'm staying in the small little inn. So he says, what? A person like you, a person of great means, a prominent businessman, you're going to stay in a little Motel 6? You don't have a 5-star hotel? He says, well, there's no 5-star hotels in this little town. So he says, yes, but how could you sleep in a Motel 6? It's not befitting. So the businessman says, look, at home, I need luxury. But when I'm traveling, I could compromise for less. So the Maggid says, when I'm traveling, I also compromise for less. In other words, from the attitude of the righteous, this whole journey on earth, 70, 80, 100 years, is just, it's not your goal. It's not where you are. You're here for a reason. So you're on the purpose, just like a journey. You're traveling for a purpose. You're not traveling so that you can stay at the lodge, right? The lodge is not the destination. The lodge is just a means to an end. So what Ruth is alerting Naomi is, I have your attitude, which is that this entire living on earth is a means to an end. What's the means to an end? For holiness and the service of God. And that's what she tells her. And Then the verse continues. Again, the commentaries continue. She says, where you will die, I will die. And then she continues, so may the Lord do to me, and so may he continue, if anything but death separates me and you. Literally, it's as follows. Ki hamavet, because death will separate from me and you. They're translating anything but death. But what the verse really says, the verse says, she says, I want to come with you. I will, wherever you die, I will die. I will be buried there. May Hashem, may the Lord do to me, and so he may continue, because literally, because death will separate from me and from you. What does it mean, because death will separate? So they translated, if anything but death will separate. But it's not what the verse says. The verse says only death will separate from me and you. So what are the commentaries explain? The commentaries explain that what she is saying is, I realize that what's happening here is that unless I come with you, unless I convert with you, death will separate me and you, because you are connecting to God, and you're connecting to the true God, and I'm connecting to the idols, and therefore in the afterlife we won't have any connection, because we're not going to be connected, because we did not have an opportunity to connect to the ultimate truth. So she says the reason why I want to go back with you is because I want to avoid the death separating between us. So if I convert and then my soul is connected to God and my soul is connected to Judaism, then our souls would not be separated at death. And to summarize, in her words here, the rabbis see that she highlights that she has all the foundations of Jewish theology. She believes in the existence of God. She says, my God is your God. Then she says, where you go, I will go. What does that mean? So to go is also to behave. In biblical Hebrew, v'halachta b'drachav, it says go in God's ways. What does it mean to go? Go means to behave. So when she says, your God is my God, where you will go, I will go, what she's really saying is, I will conduct myself the way you conduct yourself. In other words, her actions. She's saying, I'm accepting the actions, the lifestyle, the obligations, the actions, the mitzvot that the Jewish people do. And then she says, she's worried about what she also believes in, which the idol worshippers did not believe at the time, but she believed in the afterlife. In other words, that the soul lives beyond the body. And therefore, she's concerned about what's going to happen after she dies and who she's going to be with. And she doesn't want death to separate, right? Because the idol worshippers at the time did not believe in existence after life. And therefore, when she is saying that I don't want death to separate between us, she is showing that she believes in the Jewish idea of Hasharat HaNefesh, the soul outlives the body. Okay. One more point before we open this up to the questions. Again, one more point is finally at the end of this chapter. And so after Naomi gives her speech, and she saw, Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, so she stopped speaking to her. Interesting. She didn't accept her. She didn't reject her. She stopped speaking. And then we have a fascinating verse. And they both went on. Now, what does it mean they both went on? Vatelachna shtehem. They went, both of them. What does that mean? You could just say they went. What does they went? Both of them. We know it's both of them. What does it mean they went? If you're saying it in plural, we know they went. So there's a fascinating medrash. And the medrash says as follows. Rashi quotes it. Here you have Naomi. So she's a prominent Jewess. Here we have a woman, a Moabite woman who did not yet convert. She just said she wants to convert. Says the Medrash, says Rabbi Abahu, from this verse you could see how precious the converts are before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, before the Holy One, blessed be He, before God. As soon as she decided and she wants to convert, the verse equates both of them. They both went together means they are both equal in the eyes of God. There's one other place you see this clearly in the Bible, is in the story of the binding of Isaac. The story of the binding of Isaac, it says twice. The story in the binding of Isaac, it says it twice, that Vayelchu shnehem yachdav, they both went together. There's this conversation, there's a scene where Isaac is walking with his father, And Isaac tells his father, I see we have all the props. We have the knife, we have the wood, we got everything we need for a sacrifice except for the sacrifice. He says, where is the sheep for the sacrifice? And then the father says, God will show us the sheep. And then he says, Bini, if we don't find any sheep, then my son, you'll be the sacrifice. So here the verse spills the beans for the first time that Isaac knows that it's possible and probable that he will be the sacrifice. Immediately after that, what does the verse say? They both went together. Says Rashi, they both went together. When you say both are going together, instead of saying they went, and it's talking about two people, both going together means they're equal in their intention here. So in that context, it's that both the father and the son were willing to go ahead with the plan of sacrificing Isaac. That's what the Torah is highlighting there. But here, when it says both of them went, even though we know there are two people, so the verse could have just said they went. So the Medrash says what's happening here is it's telling us how precious the convert is. As soon as the convert just agrees and desires to convert, they are already equal to Naomi, who's a prominent woman from a prominent family and a prominent Jewess, but just that agreement already equates them before the eyes of God. And that leads us to the conclusion of chapter 1. And now we know who the characters are, and the drama sort of explodes in chapter 2. For now, we'll open up the floor to discussion. And if anybody wants to share or ask a question, wonderful. Otherwise, we will go ahead.
Is it possible that Naomi is goodbye, leave, and she's also embarrassed. She can't really bring them with her because about Moabites, they're not going to be. It's going to lower her esteem. As it is, they took off. Because they had money and everybody else was poor. They didn't do something that was so nice to begin with when they left. Now she's going to show up with these two girls. Would that be an embarrassment to her?
Yeah, so I said that there were 3 opinions of why Naomi's trying to dissuade her. That is the second opinion. So that's a valid opinion. And ultimately, Naomi could be somewhat embarrassed by the fact that she's coming back with Moabite, in other words, non-Jewish daughters-in-law. That sort of reminds people not just of the concept of intermarriage, but also the concept of that she abandoned the people and went to Moab instead of staying. And so that's a valid reason. Remember, we don't know, the Torah doesn't tell us the Torah does not tell us the motivation of the characters. That's very interesting about biblical storytelling. Almost never do we actually know clearly, does the narrator, does the book tell us the motivation. The book tells us the story, and it's up to us to try to derive what the motivation is. So therefore, there are multiple opinions, and indeed, there are multiple opinions, and indeed that is one of them. But that's not the only one, and the reason is that as soon as she sees that she's committed, she says she allows her to come with her, right? So if that's the motivation, if the motivation is that of shame, then the fact that Ruth really wants to be a Jew, or at least come with her, that doesn't necessarily mitigate the shame. So there are multiple opinions. Agreed. Somebody asked, I said that they came back penniless. How do we know? Well, we know that in the next chapter, we see that they have no food and they have to go collect grain in the fields the way from the gifts to the poor, as we will elaborate upon in chapter 2. So that's an obvious indication that they come back, they have no money. And so what happened that they lost the money over the 10 years? The Torah does not tell us exactly. The book doesn't tell us exactly where they made their wrong investments or what exactly they did wrong, how they lost their money, but it's clear that they come back, they're completely impoverished, they have no money whatsoever. That's clear from the story. Exactly which stocks they picked and how the money went bad, we don't know, but that's clear. That's clear in the verse.
Rabbi, I have a question about Naomi mentioning that she cannot have any more children. Was she referring to levirate marriage, that if she did have children, they would have married?
Yes, she was referring to levirate marriage, that in biblical times, if a person dies without children, then the brother is supposed to marry marry the widow, but she was referring to more broadly that obviously Naomi's family was happy to marry these girls, but she's saying there's nobody else. In other words, nobody else will marry you. With levirate marriage, if there's no brothers, then the widow could marry anybody. But in this case, it's not the case because there were Moabite women, and at that point, people believed that the verse in the Torah that precludes us from marrying Moabites refers both to males and females. So she's saying it's even more dramatic than a regular case of levirate marriage, because a regular case of levirate marriage, if there's a brother, you wait for the brother. If there's no brother, you can marry whoever you want, right? We have the biblical story of Judah and Tamar, where it's a similar situation. Tamar is waiting for the younger brother to grow up so she can marry him. But that doesn't happen in this case. So when she says, I can't have any more children, she's basically saying, and there's nobody else. There's nobody else that will marry you because of your lineage. So there's no future, and there's no future for you in the land of Judea.
But levirate marriage would be an exception,
It wouldn't be an exception.
which was
Again,
known at the time.
Yeah, but this family, obviously, this family would marry them, right? Even if if at that point they thought it's against the law, clearly this family is marrying Moabite women. So there's no reason why, if there would be another brother, he couldn't marry them either.
Rabbi?
Okay, I just want to, before I take another question, I just want to highlight, I just want to conclude the chapter because there's a very emotional part here, and you get sort of the picture of Naomi. Naomi literally comes from the word Noam, sweet. That's what the word means. So obviously, this is an indication that she had lived a sweet life. She came from luxury. So they come back to Beit Lechem. I'm just going to read the last couple of verses. It's very moving. They both went on until they arrived at Beit Lechem, and it came to pass when they arrived at Beit Lechem that the entire city was astir on their account. And they said, is this Naomi? So in other words, when she came back, it was big news. Now, why was it big news? What's the big deal, right? So this is another indication that this woman was a famous woman, a wealthy woman. And when she comes back with nothing, that is a shocker. So that everyone is shocked. It creates a stir in the entire city. Hazot Nami, is this Naomi? And she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara. Don't call me sweet, call me bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full. Again, I went away full could mean I went away with a family, but it could also mean full of wealth. Right? It doesn't say the word wealth, but it could mean wealth. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why then should you call me Naomi, seeing that the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has dealt harshly with me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabites, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the fields of Moab, and they came to Beit Lechem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Verse 22 is very strange. Verse 22 sort of reiterates. Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the fields of Moab. Okay, how many times could you say in one verse that Naomi returns that Naomi and Ruth are returning from the fields of Moab? Why does it say it so many times? So this is sort of an indication of what's happening here. When she came to town, she's in the news. Everybody is shocked. Everyone says, what happened to you? When they hear the story, nobody lifts a finger to help her. Why not? Well, the answer lies in verse 22. Why not? The verse highlights twice, even though we know it, they came back from the fields of Moab. So everybody in Judea doesn't want to help her because everybody feels almost betrayed by Naomi for leaving and fleeing at their own time of need to the fields of Moab. So verse 22, which is the final verse of chapter 1, and leading us into chapter 2, is going to explain how this lady who was a sensation, she comes to town, everybody's astir, everybody's moving, everyone's talking about her, and yet not one person lifts a finger to help her or reaches out to them and offers help. Nothing, zero. Why is that? Perhaps it's alluded to in the last verse because the Torah emphasizes again and again, and this is what's in the forefront of people's minds. She came back from the fields of Moab, which means she ran away to the fields of Moab when we needed her. So therefore, people are hurt, and people do not want to help her. So this is sort of leads us into the next chapter, where she's not only penniless but all her all her relatives and all the people who knew her and all the rest of the Jewish community, nobody's reaching out to help her because of this terrible moral stain that she comes back from the field of Moab. So that's the conclusion of chapter 1. We're going to open up, I'm going to take a few more questions, and tomorrow, God willing, at 10 o'clock, we continue with chapter 2 in good health.
CVS Care message erased. Saved message
If
received.
anybody wants to share, I'll try to.
Rabbi, can you
Yes.
address the translation of the word? Because in English, it means to separate. The main meaning is to separate. So is that a piece? Is that the English translation? That's
I'm my dick. Yes, you think about it. How does that
somewhat.
What word are we
Closing.
talking about? It's hard for me to hear. What word are we talking about?
The word cleave in
Oh, but
English
not bake. Yeah, cleave.
really means something different. It means to separate, like to separate the wheat, or to
Let's get the shoes.
a separation.
Let's see how much they're
So
going
is she
Then you'll decide how much is worth
in
it.
cleaving
Okay, is it
to
worth
her
$25
mother-in-law's?
for
Ruth
$4
also,
for 2 days? Is it worth
she's
it
needing to
$50? You'll decide.
separate, and is that why,
Okay.
almost out of love for her daughter-in-law, she's trying to protect her, from the fact that she's going to have to also be separated from her loved ones, just the way,
Okay, so
when
you're
the way
referring to a
she's
different
rejected.
definition. Thank God I have the internet here, so I hear.
Yeah,
there are
that might as
multiple
well just ask my dad.
definitions. Okay, I'm going to try to mute because I can.
Dude, it's a lot of money. Sammy, go.
So I'm reading the dictionary here. So one definition of cleave is to adhere firmly and closely, or loyally and unwaveringly. So there's another definition of cleave: to divide by, or as if by cutting blow, or as if by a cutting blow. So we're not referring to the second definition, we're referring to the first one. Cleave is to adhere firmly and closely, or loyally, or unwaveringly. So these are very strong terms. And like I said, in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, the way you know the meaning of a word is if you look at the context. And the context of that word cleave, where it appears in other places in the Bible, is the deepest connections between people, the most intimate connections between people, like a man and woman. It uses the term cleave. So when you say that Ruth cleaved to Naomi, it doesn't just mean they're going somewhere together. It means they have a deep emotional and spiritual bond. Okay, I'm unmuting. I hope that helps.
You get 33%. You'll get the money more. Okay, y'all see deal.
Okay.
Yeah,
If anybody else has any comments, wonderful. It's good to see everybody. I hope to see you again tomorrow. The action, ladies and gentlemen, is just beginning. Okay? The action is just beginning.
High Plan LA.
Pick it out of there. No, I keep it over there.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
we got
you.
some quiet now. Thank you, Tina.
Yasha Koa.
Yasha Kov, Rabbi.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Wonderful day.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.